Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, today I wear a black ribbon to mourn the death of democracy and good governance in Guyana. When you have a government that refuses to consult on what would be our first oil budget, when you take into account that the PPP gave the parliamentary opposition only 2 working days to scrutinize the biggest budget in the history of our country, then we can confirm that democracy and good governance is dead in Guyana. Mr. Speaker, a budget is supposed to inform the nation of the government's plan in relation to the income and expenditure and how their lives would be affected. After listening to the Honorable Minister, Anand Prasad's incoherent presentation, I conclude that we are in a very, very bad place as a nation. Clearly, he lacks the ability and competence to be a minister of government. Mr. Speaker, today I stand to explain to this nation the APNU AFC coalition vision for Guyana, and to demonstrate in contrast how the People's Progressive Party fails in that regard. Mr. Speaker, the vision we share is of a Guyana where we are united as a people, we are united as a people with one destiny. A vision where no Guyanese is left behind, regardless of race, sex, age, religion, geographical location, or which political party they support. For it is our constitutional right, according to Article 41, which states that every person in Guyana is entitled to the basic right to a happy, creative, and productive life, free from hunger, disease, ignorance, and want. Mr. Speaker, that basic right which our Constitution affords us is not guaranteed in this budget. The biggest budget ever. It is not afforded in this budget. Filled with billions upon billions of oil money. It fails to properly address poverty. And to put the mechanisms in place to eradicate it altogether from the length and breadth of this country in the shortest possible time. Mr. Speaker, Guyana is dubbed as one of the fastest growing economies in the world, the Cooperative Oil Republic of Guyana, with over $600 million already in the bank. Mr. Speaker, now Guyana has only about 750,000 people, not 75 million, not 7 million, 750,000 people. That means, Mr. Speaker, that we already have in the Natural Resource Fund close to $1 million for every man, woman, and child that lives in this country. Mr. Speaker, with access to those resources, with access to those sums of money, the APNU AFC coalition guarantees this nation that absolutely no Guyanese would be left behind when we form the next government. Here is a clear opportunity for us, Mr. Speaker, an opportunity afforded to no other government of this country, before, and the PPP fails to recognize that. This government is showing no urgency, dragging their feet on a national development agenda. What do they want Guyanese to do? Mr. Speaker, wait until the next 5 to 10 years? They need to put the proper mechanisms in place to end poverty right now. Mr. Speaker, when Libya found oil, the pace at which they moved to eliminate poverty and to transform the lives of their citizens was remarkable. They didn't build one highway this year, then build a bridge next year, and tell the poor citizens that they won't receive any real benefit from the oil until another 5 to 10 years. They love their country and all of their people. Their government wasn't a bunch of selfish hustlers and thieves. They did what they had to do. They did what they had to do for all their people, even as they did the infrastructural work and other works. Mr. Speaker, if you got married, you got an allowance. When you got your first child, you got an allowance. They transformed the desert nation into a modern state, but ensured that they took care of their people at the same time. But this PPP government, Mr. Speaker, is only talking about 4-lane highways and the big hotels. They boast about the Amelia Falls hydropower plant, which no one is sure how, and in fact, if it will lower our electricity rates, a project which will probably take the next 20 years for the government to own. All this while the ordinary Guyanese continue to live from paycheck to paycheck, battling with the extremely high cost of living. Mr. Speaker, the struggle is real. Mr. Speaker, the struggle is real. Mr. Speaker, we don't have time to wait. We have the money. It's not Jack Dio's money. It's not Irfan's money. The money belongs to the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, I will tell you a story. 2 weeks ago, I was in the Anne Regina market where I met a vendor by the name of Amrita. She was canvassing for me to buy some fruits from her. And when she recognized that I was the regional MP that represented her and the other vendors against the wicked and uncaring PPP government, she began to explain to me that she was a single parent who had 4 children to maintain. She was there since 6 a.m. and it was already 10 a.m., but she had no sales yet. I bought all the fruits and vegetables that I had to get from her. She then proceeded to say to me that she voted for this PPP government back in 2020. And now she was disappointed, especially with the high cost of living. And she could not understand why the government she supported wanted to put those vendors who are mostly single parent women out of a daily bread. Mr. Speaker, people are suffering out there. People are suffering out there. Even those that supported this PPP government. They are now beginning to understand who the PPP really are. They are a bunch of selfish politicians. Selfish politicians who have access to resources that no other government had access to before, but choose to ignore the many voices of the poor and vulnerable, only focusing on themselves, their own families, and the rich. Mr. Speaker, in the coalition's vision, with a vast amount of oil resources available to the government, we would have prepared a budget which would have taken care of all Guyanese from the womb to the tomb. And it would not have been solely through cash grants. We believe that cash grants are useful. And in fact, the amounts offered in this budget should have been much more for all Guyanese, especially the poor and the vulnerable. But as a coalition, we have a more broad-based vision of a social system which takes care of all Guyanese throughout their lifespan. Mr. Speaker, when a child is born, assistance should be immediately given through some child care package. And as he goes through to school, he gets all the assistance necessary, including free education, something that this PPP took away from our young people. Free education at the University of Guyana level, and a stipend which we propose to take care of the basic needs. And even as they enter the world of work and retire and become a pensioner, a proper pension is there for him to enjoy that good life while traveling into the sunset. But Mr. Speaker, Instead of this approach, the PPP government has crafted a budget that is unfit for purpose. A budget that fails to address the core issue, a core issue like poverty, but instead seeks to increase the gap between the rich and the poor. Mr. Speaker, while we welcome the fact that the government has heeded our call to increase the tax threshold, increasing the tax threshold from 65,000 to 75,000 will not solve the problem of the working poor, the retail clerks, the nurses, the cleaners. It will not solve their problem. Mr. Speaker, that translates into merely a $2,800 increase that cannot cover even the light bill of an average working poor Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, as part of this coalition, my party, as part of this coalition, has proposed that the tax threshold be increased to 125,000. Had the PPP government, we hadn't the oil money. Now you have it, so you should have increased it to 125,000. Had the PPP government listened to us, the working poor would have paid no income tax and would have had close to $20,000 extra disposable income in their pockets, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the APNU AFC coalition believes that there are a number of other mechanisms that could have been used to bring relief to the working poor. The PPP, if they cared about the working poor, could have implemented the earned income tax credit for low-income workers. So as you work, you earn tax rebates. Or, Mr. Speaker, there is also a system called the earning supplement, which is aimed at ensuring that each worker earn at least the minimum livable wage. Whatever amount you fell short by, the government would step in and top up your salary to the livable wage, to that livable amount. So if you establish that the livable wage is 125,000, but you only work for $100,000, then the government tops up your salary with $25,000. It encourages people to join the workforce and is considered the most effective anti-poverty measure by most economists. To get the top up, you had to work. Now, on the issue of work, the government boasts about local content and their manifesto promise of 50,000 jobs. But the way things are going right now, it is clear that the oil industry is quickly eating up the non-oil industries. Everything is centered around oil production. And the spin-off with the oil services. So these jobs, if they are to become a reality, will in fact have to come from the oil sector. But how can Guyanese maximize on the local content? How can Guyanese maximize on the local content opportunities when this government has failed to push significant investments into our only premier tertiary institution, the University of Guyana? Rather than increase the subvention from last year, they reduced it. Mr. Speaker, on page 23 of the budget speech, paragraph 411 to 413, the finance minister gloats that the minister within the ministry of, y'all just make him the finance minister. As Comrade Amansa said, that minister gloats about Guyana, that Guyana has the 17th largest oil reserve. He went on to say that we are producing at 120,000 barrels per day with a Lisa Destiny FPSO. He said coming soon in early 2022 is the Lisa Unity, which will take it to 340,000 barrels per day. Then the Lisa Prospect, in 2024, which will further carry it to 560,000 barrels per day, and the yellowtail carrying it straight to 810,000 barrels per day. Mr. Speaker, if you multiply 810,000 barrels per day by a moderate figure, $60 per barrel, you would get close to more than 48 million US dollars per day. Mr. Speaker, it is due to these very precise projections and the funds that we have already accumulated that the young people expect that UG would be transformed into an institution that will provide the requisite skills for them to take advantage of the local content opportunities available, and don't allow the foreigners, only the foreigners, to grab the high-paying jobs. They expect that while they are being trained, they would receive the much-needed assistance to carry them through. Mr. Speaker, with a current growth rate of 19.9% and a projected growth rate of 47.5%, entrepreneurs, the small business people, the women and the youths expect to get the $5 million proposed by the coalition to set up their small businesses. Those rice farmers in Region 2 expect to see more than just the construction of one drying floor. 2022 should have seen the construction of a number of drying floors across the region. Those very farmers expect to see in this budget significant measures to reduce the cost of fertilizer. Those farmers in the Pomeroon expect to see a drainage policy which would guarantee that they don't suffer like they did for so many months during 2020 and 2021. They expect to see the realization of the road already drafted by the AP and UAFC to be constructed on the eastern bank of the lower Pomeroon River, which would allow farmers to easily and quickly transport their produce out of the Pomeroon River at a lower cost. Mr. Speaker, I have walked the streets of Nabaklis on the East Coast, where I met with so many farmers, close to 100 of them in that area. Some doing poultry, some doing pigs, others doing other cash crops, okra, boro, balanji. Their major hindrance, the major hindrance there is the condition of the access road and flooding. And so they too expect that the Minister of Agriculture would stick to his word and fix the long overdue farm to market road at Middlewalk, Nabaklis. They expect that. Mr. Speaker, this government seems to be at a loss. The focus must be on the vulnerable communities, the poor and the vulnerable, single parents, the elderly, etc. Some of the poorest and most vulnerable communities include many in the hinterland regions, where 50% and more are in poverty. Mr. Speaker, this government is yet to explain to our first people how exactly our indigenous brothers and sisters will benefit from our oil industry. We are yet to see any new program to be implemented as a result of this newfound oil well. On page 26 of the budget, the finance minister talks about job creation for indigenous youths through the CSO program. He boasts about the increase in numbers from 2,000 to 2,500, creating 500 jobs. Mr. Speaker, this is shameless for a minister to look at us with a straight face and to tell the indigenous people that he's creating 500 jobs. Mr. Speaker, at $30,000 per month, $30,000 per month, added to the higher cost of living, added to the higher cost of items in the hinterland area, the CSO jobs are classified by the minister must be the lowest paying job in the entire Caribbean. It does not even address the government's own minimum wage plan of $65,000. Surely our indigenous brothers and sisters deserve better paying jobs, skilled jobs, jobs that would, skilled jobs, they deserve skilled jobs, not handouts. Jobs that would ensure that they live comfortably and can even support their families. And as I said, not handouts. Mr. Speaker, on page 87 of the budget speech, the minister posited that his government recognizes that there has been some upward movement in the prices at marketplaces for a number of food items. Mr. Speaker, upward movement, a number of food items. Mr. Speaker, where are these ministers living? Where are these ministers living? The food prices took off like a rocket. Everything gone sky high. Poor people punishing to put bread on their table. Mr. Speaker, as I said before, this struggle is real. But I guess that they can't see it from behind those big fences across at Pradoville. Mr. Speaker, on that same page in the budget speech, the minister talks about relief mechanism like lowering excise tax on fuel. He said in 2021, he did it two times. 2021, he reduced it from 50% to 35%, and then 35% to 20%. He's now proposing that he is now pleased to announce that he is reducing it from 20% to 10%. Well, Mr. Speaker, I want the minister to know that the average driver on the road didn't see any real benefit in it, didn't really realize any real benefit from that. The average housewife didn't realize any significant benefit from that. Within 2 weeks, Honorable Ganesh Maipal could tell you, within 2 weeks, that gas price went way back up, almost to the same place that it was in both instances. So they did not realize any real benefit from those fuel cuts. Mr. Speaker, so it begs the question, who are the real beneficiaries from the tax cut? Is it those persons, the big boys that import the fuel? It only could be them. It can only be them that are realizing the real benefits from this measure. Mr. Speaker, we welcome any tax cut, but the government must ensure that the benefits of those cuts actually reach those that need it the most. The housewives, the single mothers, those hard-working farmers, they need it the most. Mr. Speaker, if you turn to the very next page in the budget speech, page 89, you will see that the government talks about other costs of living measures, blaming the floods for the high increase. In paragraph 6.13, they are now talking about consulting with communities. Now, after almost 1 year later, Mr. Speaker, now they want to do impact assessment. Mr. Speaker, this government can't be serious. They cannot be serious about the development of our people. Not in the Cooperative Oil Republic of Guyana. To make matters worse, on the very next page, Mr. Speaker, they talk about supporting the elderly. They boast about increasing the old age pension. I heard a similar sentiment from the Honorable Minister who spoke before me. Mr. Speaker, they want to move it from 25,000 to 28,000. Then say to the nation that the old people got, and Honorable Member Anand Prasad just repeated that garbage, that the old people of this country now gets 2.3 billion of disposable income. Mr. Speaker, that is very insulting. Mr. Speaker, this right here has got to be the greatest joke. One of the biggest disappointments of this budget, 2022, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 2022, we expect, Mr. Speaker, in 2022, we expect to pump over 340,000 barrels of oil per day. When we expect our earnings to move close to $1 billion US. The PPP government gives our pensioners a mere $3,000 increase. No, man, no. No, Mr. Speaker, no. That is not acceptable in 2022, Mr. Speaker. Where is the love? Where is the love? Where is the care? No, Mr. Speaker. Without the benefit of oil, the APNU AFC government moved the pension from $13,000 all the way up to $20,500 without the benefit of oil, Mr. Speaker. It is a shame, it is an embarrassment in 2022 that we can treat our pensioners this way, Mr. Speaker. I reject this measure in the budget, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we increased it by over 55% without the benefit of oil. Mr. Speaker, if there wasn't a no confidence motion, to stop the progress, we would have increased that pension further, Mr. Speaker. So how do you come now with oil money in hand and come only to give $3,000, but then you can selectively give to one group $250,000, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in Region 2, many of the persons working on the front line to assist in the COVID vaccine drive, those from the People's Militia and others employed at the Saudi hospital, has not been paid for months. When they inquired, they were told that the government doesn't have money. They don't know when if the president will approve their payment. Mr. Speaker, just last Christmas, they got nothing to take home to their families after working and placing their lives at risk. But this government found money to pay a select group who did no work, $250,000 per person. Mr. Speaker, we don't mind government distributing any relief, but right must be right and wrong must be wrong, Mr. Speaker. It is not fair, Mr. Speaker. It is not fair. But guess why, Mr. Speaker? Guess why they didn't care to pay those militia people? Guess why, Mr. Speaker? They are perceived to be APNU AFC supporters, and so their lives don't matter. Mr. Speaker, the same can be said about the call to place in the budget at least 10% interim pay increase for the public servants, and eventually get them to that place of 25% increase from there, so that those hard-working nurses and teachers, people, cleaners, etc., can have more monies in their pockets to support their families. Those measures fell on deaf ears because why? They are perceived to be APNU AFC supporters, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while this is a forced oil budget, it fails, Mr. Speaker, it fails to address the pillars of poverty. It fails to address the social inequality in our society. It fails to address the needs of the poor and the most vulnerable. People have lost hope at a time when we should have been most hopeful, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the APNU AFC coalition, like most Guyanese, recognizes the shortcomings of the PPP government.
Honorable Member, so we don't fail you, we need to give you an extension of time to conclude.
Thank you, Comrade Speaker. I move that the Honorable Chairman and Honorable Member be given 5 minutes to conclude his presentation.
Honorable Member, you can continue.
Thank you, Comrade Speaker. Thank you, Comrade Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I was saying to this House and this nation, the APNU AFC coalition, like most Guyanese, recognize the shortcomings of this PPP government and their inability to manage our oil wealth. We are cognizant of their practice of poor governance and their inability to present a comprehensive national developmental plan with set goals and timelines to deliver a better standard of living to all Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, may I say to the Guyanese people, that they deserve more. They deserve more, Mr. Speaker. And when the APNU AFC coalition forms the next government, we will certainly give you more. Mr. Speaker, we will develop a national agenda that will deliver a better quality of life for all Guyanese. I thank you.